When Jonathan spoke to his father about the many heroic acts of David, King Saul paid attention to him and made a solemn promise, "As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain," verse 6 of chapter 19. And David returned to the palace, but very soon afterwards, once again, Saul threw a javelin at him and then sent messengers to ambush him at his house. But he didn't tell his son Jonathan. When David fled for his life, he conferred with Jonathan. And our reading is part of that conference in 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verses 16 to 18. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies." And Jonathan caused David to swear again, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty." Jonathan was completely unaware of his father's broken promise and subsequent murderous attacks on David. But he agreed to approach the king again to find out his real attitudes towards him. The following day was the start of the month, the time when it was expected that the whole court would gather for a meal. Jonathan would go to this monthly event, but David would stay away. Indeed, he was fearful to go. Following this meal, then, Jonathan would report back to David what he found out about King Saul's real thoughts. That's the background to our reading, but I want you to notice that in this passage, once again, we read about the very close attachment that there was between these two men. In chapter 18, we read that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul, verse 1 of chapter 18. We read those very words again here. He loved him as he loved his own soul, verse 17. In chapter 19, we could have read that Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, chapter 19, verse 2. And it was because of this that Jonathan's words have particular pathos when he said, "Thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty," verse 18. There is a general sense in which those words were true. At the table, there would be a place for David, and the fact that he wasn't going to attend the meal would mean that that seat would not be sat upon. It would remain empty. But there's a more personal sense in which those words were true. It would be a matter of fact to most people. But for Jonathan, it would be the absence of one who, to him, meant something particularly special. It was the absence of a much loved one. And that is especially sad at this time of year, when families come together and a loved one is missing. I'm thinking of all those for whom Christmas will never be quite the same again. You have walked this year through the valley of the shadow of death, Psalm 23, verse 4. And there's an empty seat at home, and perhaps you're still missing and mourning for that loved one. I want to try to encourage you with this promise from the Lord himself, taken from the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 61, to comfort all that mourn, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. For those of us who love the Lord, emptiness, painful though it is but a passing thing, soon to be exchanged at the coming of the Lord for fullness of joy, Psalm 16. I want to encourage you in the Lord that even though there is in your home, as there is in mine, an empty seat and one who is missed, there is one that cares for us with a tender care, and he wants to lift our hearts and to draw us closer to himself.